My husband always said I was too old to start over. So he bought our forever home, speaking Italian over my head. I just smiled, poured his coffee, and pretended I understood nothing. What he didn't know was that I'd been studying every night in secret. And one sentence from that charming Italian sailor made our whole marriage look like a carefully staged trap. My name is Nora. I'm 63 years old, and I've been called a lot of things in my life: sweet, patient, sensible, good with paperwork. No one ever called me dangerous. That's probably why my husband, Daniel, felt so comfortable underestimating me for 4 decades. When we first married, he used to introduce me as the smartest woman I know. I still remember those early years: cheap wine, small apartments, big dreams. We'd sit on secondhand furniture and talk about the life we'd have one day: proper house, retirement by the coast, maybe a little trip to Italy when we were older. Somewhere along the way, we turned into Kie. He got the promotions. He learned how to talk to banks and brokers. He handled the important conversations with contractors, lawyers, anyone who made more than we did. I handled the casseroles, the laundry, and the birthday cards for his side of the family. You don't notice the shift at first. It doesn't happen in one argument, it happens in 1,000 small ones. Don't worry, I'll talk to the accountant. You'll just get stressed if you look at the numbers. Trust me, Nora, this isn't your area. By the time I was in my late 50s, my name was on the Christmas cards, but not on half the contracts that built our life. He didn't do it with screaming or slamming doors. Honestly, that might have been easier to fight. Daniel is a quiet kind of controlling. He uses phrases like "relax, I've got this" as handcuffs. The funny part is, I used to love languages. As a girl, I'd copy Italian phrases out of cookbooks, practice the sounds while stirring sauce on my mother's old stove. I told Daniel that once, maybe 30 years ago, when he was still half listening to me. I said, "When we retire, I want to sit in a little cafe in Rome and order without pointing at the menu." He laughed and kissed my forehead. "You and your cute little ideas, Nora." Fast forward to 2 years ago. Our children were grown and gone. Our three-bedroom house felt increasingly too big and too empty. And Daniel announced, over the clatter of dinner dishes, that it was time to upgrade our life. "Townhouse closer to the city," he said, spearing a piece of chicken with the kind of confidence I've never had for anything. "Something modern, good resale. We'll be smart this time." "We?" I asked. He didn't even look up. You know what I mean. That night, after the plates were washed and the dishwasher hummed, I sat at the old desktop, computer in the corner of our living room. Just for fun, I typed "learn Italian for free" into the search bar. Videos, apps, podcasts. Apparently, the whole world was learning something except me. The first lesson felt like sneaking dessert before dinner. Simple phrases, cheerful voice in my headphones, the thrill of recognizing a word I'd once seen in a cookbook. My brain, which had been stuck on grocery lists and Daniel's cholesterol numbers for years, actually felt awake. I didn't tell him. Not because I thought I was doing something wrong, but because I knew exactly how it would go. "Really? At your age? Why not do something useful?" "You never finish these things, Nora." He'd said the same thing when I mentioned pottery and watercolor and that weekend accounting seminar I wanted to take for fun. Every idea I had was an expense. Every idea he had was an investment. So I kept my little rebellion tucked into the quiet parts of the day. When he fell asleep in front of the television, I'd slip on my headphones and repeat verbs under my breath. When he went golfing on Saturdays, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a notebook, scribbling vocabulary between coffee stains. It felt deliciously wrong to have something that was mine. No spreadsheets for him to correct, no opinion for him to flatten with his version of logic. Just me, a notebook, and a language he didn't know I was slowly claiming. Months passed, his life stayed the same: work calls, sports, checking our accounts. Mine changed in tiny ways. Italian phrases started running under my thoughts like subtitles. I'd hear a word on a cooking show and think, "I know that one." The day he came home waving a printed listing, I was in the middle of an online lesson about buying property, ironically enough. Nora, look at this, he said, dropping the pages next to my laptop so hard my mouse jumped. End unit townhouse near the river. Italian owner moving back to Europe. This is exactly the kind of smart move I've been talking about. I closed the browser with one quick click. To him, I was just scrolling recipes. Italian owner, I asked, trying to sound mildly curious instead of wildly alert. Yeah, he said, grinning. Name's Lorenzo something. We've emailed a bit. He prefers to talk in Italian. Makes him more comfortable, I guess. Good thing I remember enough from those business trips. I remembered those trips too. 3 days in Milan, where he didn't have time to FaceTime. A week in Florence, where he came back tan and distant. Do you, I asked gently, remember enough? He puffed up. Of course I do. You think they sent me overseas to be the stupid one? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The important part was he thought I understood nothing. We set a viewing for Saturday at 11. By Friday night, I'd gone through every Italian real estate video I could. Fine. I wasn't fluent, not by a long shot, but I understood more than he'd ever imagine. Contract, deed, co-owner, sole owner, mortgage. Those words I made sure to know cold. Saturday morning, he dressed like he was interviewing for God. Charcoal blazer, the serious watch, that cologne he only uses when he wants to impress someone who makes more money than he does. You look nice, I said, pulling on my plain navy cardigan. You too, he replied automatically, not really looking. His eyes were on the folder of documents in his hand. Just let me lead the conversation, okay? It gets confusing with foreigners. You'll get bored. There it was again, his favorite spell. You'll get bored. What he really meant was you might ask a question I don't want to answer. Of course, I said. My voice sounded small. Inside, I was reciting conjugations just to steady myself. The townhouse was beautiful. Haven't I had to admit that? Tall windows, clean brick, little trees lining the sidewalk. As we walked up the path, I could already smell fresh coffee drifting through the open upstairs window. Lorenzo opened the door with a smile that told me he'd never had to worry about being ignored in a room. Early 50s, salt and pepper hair, pressed shirt. Buongiorno, he said warmly to Daniel, then repeated it to me. I let my eyes widen, gave a little awkward nod, and answered in English. Hi. Daniel chuckled, clapping Lorenzo on the shoulder like an old friend. Then he switched into Italian, his accent thick but serviceable. This is my wife, Nora, he said. She doesn't understand a word, but she likes pretty kitchens. If you've ever wanted proof that a man is stupid, listen to what he says when he thinks you're deaf. We stepped inside. They kept talking in Italian. I let my gaze drift over the living room, counting the words I caught. Quiet neighborhood. Recently renovated. Great light. Daniel translated almost nothing for me, just tossed over. He says it's a good area, as if that covered the paragraphs Lorenzo was actually saying. We moved from room to room. They talked price, market, timing. I nodded when Daniel glanced back, my heart hammering with every phrase I managed to understand. In the kitchen, sunlight poured over the marble counters, the kind of space I dreamed about when I was making spaghetti on our old electric stove. Lorenzo leaned on the island, folded his arms, and spoke a little more quietly. Listen, he said to Danielle in Italian. If you want to keep things simple, we can put everything in just one name, one owner. It's easier with the bank, with the tax forms. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. Daniel tilted his head, interested. You mean only in my name? Lorenzo glanced at me. I kept my eyes on the sink, as if I were assessing water pressure instead of my entire future. In your name, yes, he said carefully. Your wife. She knows you'll do it that way? And that's when I heard the sentence that made my stomach drop through the floor. Daniel laughed, a low, dismissive sound I'd never heard directed at me before. He waved a hand like he was brushing away crumbs. In Italian, fluently enough for there to be no mistake, he said, "She doesn't need to know. She doesn't understand any of this anyway." Lorenzo hesitated, looking between us. Daniel went on, voice steady. "Just draw it up with me as the only owner." I stood there in that beautiful kitchen, staring at the faucet, while their words burned through me. And the next thing Lorenzo said in Italian told me exactly how disposable my husband believed I really was. When you reach my age, you think you felt every kind of heartbreak. But standing in that spotless Italian kitchen, pretending to admire the stove while my husband erased me from our future in a language he thought I couldn't understand. No, that was a new kind of humiliation. I kept my face perfectly still. If Daniel glanced at me at all, and he rarely did during moments he considered business, he saw what he'd always seen: the polite wife who didn't cause trouble and didn't need details. Inside, my ribs were shaking like something was trying to break out. Lorenzo shifted uncomfortably. Even he seemed startled by how casually Daniel dismissed me. The man had known us for all of 15 minutes, yet I could see the flicker of confusion on his face. "Does your wife really not matter at all?" Daniel chuckled again, clapping Lorenzo on the shoulder as if they were teammates. "Just put my name," he repeated. "She doesn't follow financial matters. Never has. Never has. Do you know what it's like to hear your entire life flattened into 2 words? 2 lies." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. My whole life had trained me for this. 40 years of being talked over in bank offices and hardware stores, of hearing Nora let me handle it, until the words became the wallpaper of our marriage. Lorenzo cleared his throat, dropping his voice even more. "Are you sure she'd be comfortable with this arrangement?" Daniel waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. "She'll sleep better not worrying about paperwork, trust me." There it was again, trust me, the blade he always used. But still. I said nothing. I needed to hear everything. Lorenzo walked us into the dining room, trying to smooth the discomfort with cheerful descriptions of the neighborhood. Cafes, walking paths, a weekend market by the water. I followed a few steps behind, hands folded in front of me, nodding when appropriate. But every word of Italian poured into my ears like acid. Good price. Immediate possession. His wife doesn't need details. Only one owner makes everything easier. Easier for who? Daniel kept glancing around the townhouse with the proud proprietary posture of a man who had already decided the place belonged to him. I watched him walk from room to room like he was evaluating potential property lines rather than a shared life. In the living room, Lorenzo opened the sliding doors to the balcony. Sunlight washed the floor, and I stepped into it as if that would warm me. But no, my veins felt icy. "This view," Daniel said in English for my benefit. "Nice, right? Plenty of light." "You'll like that. You'll like that. Not we, not us." He spoke like a man selecting a dog bed. We sat at the glass dining table while Lorenzo gathered documents from a sleek folder. He placed a simple draft agreement in front of Daniel. This structure I mentioned," he explained in the Italian, slowly, clearly, the way one speaks when they think the other party needs precision. "One owner on the deed. Cleaner, faster. Banks prefer it." Daniel nodded, flipping through the pages as if he understood them perfectly. He didn't. He never read financial documents. He skimmed and relied on confidence to fill in the gaps. Meanwhile, I understood exactly what they were discussing, right down to the phrasing about inheritance law and tax responsibilities. But I kept my face smooth. Daniel didn't translate a single sentence. Not one. He didn't even pretend to involve me. At some point, Lorenzo set 2 cappuccinos on the table, one in front of each of us. Mine had a little heart drawn into the foam. "It suits you," he said to me warmly and in English finally. "You have kind eyes." I startled slightly, not because of the compliment, but because he switched languages as if to quietly remind me he saw me as a person, not furniture. Daniel didn't notice the shift, of course not. He was too busy drawing big circles around parts of the draft contract, looking terribly important. "Tell her it's a good deal," Lorenzo said to him in Italian. Daniel didn't translate that either. Instead, he told me, he says the closets are good and the water pressure is strong. I almost laughed. Almost. But a woman doesn't survive 4 decades of marriage without mastering the art of the internal smile. We continued touring the home. The primary bedroom had beautiful windows. The walk-in closet was practically glowing with possibility. A faint, kind thought crossed my mind. I could finally have space for myself. But then Daniel said, "My office will go here. You can take the smaller bedroom for your crafts or whatever." My crafts. He meant the watercolor set, he mocked. The knitting basket he teased me for. The half-completed pottery bowl he'd called your little mess. Lorenzo paused, glanced at me again, then back at Daniel. Something unreadable passed across his face. Maybe he had a wife once who sat quiet in the corner of a room. Maybe he had a daughter whose voice wasn't heard until it broke trying. Whatever it was, he seemed to understand something Daniel never had. Back in the kitchen, the men shook hands. Preliminary agreement reached. My pulse crawled into my ears. And then, just before we left, Lorenzo said something that froze both my breath and my spine. He spoke softly, almost warningly, in Italian. "Your wife looks like she understands more than you believe." Daniel stiffened. "She doesn't," he said sharply. "Don't worry." Lorenzo's eyes drifted to me again, and I knew he suspected. He wasn't sure, but he suspected. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright. Daniel chatted the whole walk back to the car, babbling about paint colors and investment potential, while my entire world tilted beneath my feet. When he opened the driver's door, he said lightly, "Don't worry about anything, Nora. This is a man's deal. You're safe." Safe. I sat in the passenger seat, buckled my belt, and looked out the window so he wouldn't see the storm in my eyes. Because in that moment, one truth rooted itself inside me. I was done being safe, and I was done being quiet. But the real explosion didn't come until later that night, when Daniel tried to lie to my face. If you've ever lived with someone who believes they know you better than you know yourself, then you already understand what that car ride home felt like. Daniel hummed, as if he hadn't just carved me out of our future with a pen stroke. Meanwhile, I sat with one sentence looping in my head. She doesn't need to know. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I had memorized the exact sound of his betrayal. Inside the house, Daniel tossed his blazer on the sofa and plopped down like a man who'd conquered a kingdom. "That went well," he said, stretching his arms. "I'll email the guy later tonight. This place is going to appreciate fast." He turned on the TV. Sports flickered across the screen. The man could commit emotional murder and then unwind with baseball like nothing happened. I stood in the doorway of the living room, hands clasped so tightly my fingers were numb. "Daniel," I said softly. "Hmm?" He didn't look up. "We need to talk." He snorted. "About what? The decor? Don't worry, Nora. You'll get your little projects later. Let me handle the major things." Little projects. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the momentum of a dam cracking. "It's not about the decor," I said. "It's about the deed, the contract, the ownership." That got his attention. His head jerked up, and for the first time that day, he actually looked at me. "What about it?" he asked slowly. "You told him to put the property only in your name." His jaw tightened. "You misunderstood." "Did I?" "Yes," he said too quickly. "You misunderstood. You don't speak the language." It was time. I understood every word. Silence. The air compressed between us, thick enough to swallow. Daniel stood abruptly, his voice sharp. "What did you say?" "I understood every word," I repeated. "I've been learning Italian for 2 years." His face flushed a dark, furious red. "You're lying." "Why would I lie about that?" "Because you want to start a fight about nothing," he snapped, stepping closer. "You heard something wrong, and now you're making it into an issue." "I heard exactly what you said," I replied calmly. "You told him I didn't need to know anything, that I don't understand, that I don't matter. You told him to put the house in your name only." Daniel's expression changed, sliding from anger to panic, then to something nastier. "You were eavesdropping," he accused. "We were standing 3 feet apart. You shouldn't have been listening. And you shouldn't have been hiding things, I answered. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a fish trying to breathe on land. You're being dramatic, he said finally. I wasn't hiding anything. It's just paperwork. It's easier for you, I cut in. For both of us. No, I said softly, just for you. He lifted his chin like a man readying for battle. Even if I had planned to put only my name, hypothetically, it's because financially it makes sense. I earn more, I carry the bigger burden. It's my responsibility. Responsibility doesn't erase partnership, I said, or respect. Oh, here we go, he muttered, throwing up his hands. Your respect speeches. Nora, be honest. You wouldn't even know how to manage a closing, or a mortgage, or a project like this. You'd drown in the paperwork. I stared at him, finally seeing the truth with stunning clarity. Daniel didn't think I lacked intelligence. He needed me to lack it. His entire identity depended on it. Daniel, I said quietly, do you realize I've handled our taxes for 12 years? He blinked. Well, you follow instructions well. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it all hit me like a wave. Tell me something, I said. If I hadn't understood Italian, if I hadn't heard you, would you have told me later that the house wasn't in my name? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He rubbed his face, frustrated, flustered, cornered. You're making this too big, he muttered. This is what happens when wives try to... Don't finish that sentence. He froze. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. Don't you dare say when wives try to get involved. Not when you use my ignorance as a tool. He opened his mouth again, angling for the upper hand, but I wasn't done. Do you know why I didn't tell you I was learning Italian? I asked. Because you like secrets? He scoffed. No, I said, because every time I tried to grow, you cut me down. Every interest I had was cute or pointless or a waste of time. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an assistant. Daniel's voice dropped to a gravelly warning. Careful, Nora. Something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, but cleanly, like a rope giving way under too much weight. For once in my life, I whispered, I'm being anything but careful. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Good. I turned away, scooping up my purse. I'm going for a walk. We're not done, he called after me. Yes, I said, opening the front door without looking back. We are. I stepped into the cold dusk air, closing the door behind me. Not slamming, not storming. Just ending. That's the moment I knew. The woman he thought he'd married no longer existed, but the woman I was becoming. She didn't have a roadmap yet, only a voice she'd kept buried for decades, and that voice was ready to burn the silence down. I didn't walk far, just around the block, but sometimes distance is measured in clarity, not miles. By the time I circled back to the house, I'd made two decisions. I wasn't going to let Daniel talk circles around my reality. I was done pretending the marriage wasn't already broken. When I stepped inside, I expected him to be pacing, rehearsing counterarguments like a lawyer preparing for trial. Instead, he sat on the sofa in the dark, staring at the muted television. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was coil. Nora, he said, not looking at me, come sit. I didn't. I stood in the doorway, the frame acting like a shield. He rubbed the back of his neck, his tail when he felt cornered. Let's reset. We both overreacted. I didn't, I replied. I reacted to something real. You're blowing this out of proportion, he insisted. If I offended you, I apologize, but you're making it into a betrayal. It wasn't. I raised my eyebrows. You told a stranger I didn't understand anything, that it wasn't my business, that I didn't need to know, that you'd put the home in your name. Daniel winced. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? He hesitated. Then it was just easier. Oh, the word that had shackled my life. Easier. I'm not a filing cabinet, I said, and I'm not optional. I'm your wife. Of course you are, he sighed. Stop being dramatic. There it was, that brick, that little brick of dismissal he'd used for years to wall me in. Daniel, I said, voice steady. You didn't plan to tell me. If I hadn't understood Italian, I would have been erased from that deed. He opened his mouth, then shut it. We both heard the truth hanging between us. I protect this family, he said weakly. No, I answered. You control it. His cheeks flushed. What do you want me to say? That you're right? Fine. You're right. I should have told you. Happy? No. He blinked. No. Because you're not sorry for what you did, Daniel. You're sorry I heard it. He shot up from the sofa. That's unfair. What's unfair, I countered, is expecting me to be grateful while you cut me out of my own life. He paced, rubbing his temples. I can add your name later. It's not a big deal. Yes, I said softly, it is. We stood there, two people who had once walked down an aisle believing the future would be gentle. Now we stared across a decade of emotional debris. Finally, he said, what do you want from me? The truth. His jaw tightened. Fine. You want the truth? You've changed. Nora, you used to rely on me. You used to trust me. You weren't this. He gestured vaguely at me, as if pointing to an infection. This version of you, this stubbornness, is not you. I took a slow breath. This is me, I said. This has always been me. You just never looked. His eyes darkened. So you become fluent in Italian and suddenly think you're better than me? It's not about being better, I said. It's about not being invisible. He sank onto the arm of the sofa, exhausted. I work hard, he murmured. I've carried us for decades. I carried us too, I whispered, just not in the ways you counted. He didn't respond. After a long moment, I added, Daniel, I don't know if I want to move forward with this marriage. His head snapped up. You're leaving me? I didn't say that. Then what? He demanded. I said, I don't know. He shook his head fiercely. No, we're not doing this. We're not throwing away 40 years over a misunderstanding. Daniel, I said slowly, unsec, a misunderstanding is forgetting to buy milk. This was erasure. He flinched at the word, and then, so quietly I almost missed it, he said, I didn't think you'd mind. That landed harder than every argument combined. He didn't think I'd mind losing legal claim to my home. He didn't think I'd mind being excluded from decisions about our future. He didn't think I'd mind being treated like an accessory, not a partner. Because for decades, I'd taught him that I didn't. He stood abruptly. I need air, he muttered. I stepped aside as he grabbed his keys and stomped out the door. The moment it shut, I exhaled. A shaky, trembling sound I didn't recognize until I felt the warmth of tears on my cheeks. I wasn't crying because he left. I was crying because I finally saw he'd been gone for years. I sat at the dining table staring at the grain of the wood. I thought about the Italian lessons, the notebooks, the tiny rebellions that grew into this moment. Maybe I hadn't been learning a language. Maybe I'd been learning myself. Hours passed. He didn't return. When the clock blinked 1:14 a.m., I got up, walked quietly to my desk drawer, and pulled out the notebook I'd been hiding for 2 years. My Italian notes, my secret life, my growing spine. I flipped to a fresh page and began writing, not verbs or vocabulary, but a list. A list of things I deserved, a list of things I'd given up, a list of things I wanted back. The last item I wrote was the one that terrified and thrilled me the most. A home that has my name on it. Daniel came home just before dawn. He smelled like cigarettes, he didn't smoke, and fatigue. He dropped onto the couch without a word. We didn't speak, but something between us had already broken clean through, and neither of us knew how to pretend anymore. The next morning, Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in. He looked worn, eyes puffy, shoulders slumped, vulnerable in a way I wasn't used to seeing. Nora, he began, voice low, I don't want us to end. I waited. I'd learned finally the power of silence. He rubbed a mug with his thumb. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking, maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I didn't consider your feelings enough. That was as close to self-awareness as Daniel typically came. But I didn't rescue him from the discomfort this time. He sighed heavily. Tell me what you want. Just tell me what makes this okay. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I want honesty, I said, and I want respect, and I want to know why you thought I didn't deserve to be on the deed. He grimaced. It wasn't personal? It was, I replied softly. You dismissed me. You spoke about me like I wasn't standing right there. You erased me with one sentence. I didn't think you would understand the complexities, he muttered. Then you should have explained them. He shook his head, agitated. You're twisting this into something cruel. No, I said gently. I'm finally seeing it without excuses. He set his mug down a bit too hard. Fine. You want the truth? I didn't want arguments. I didn't want to debate every little thing. I just wanted something to go smoothly for once. So you cut me out. I streamlined it, he corrected. I blinked at him. You streamlined your wife. His face reddened. You know I didn't mean it that way. No, I said, I don't know that. The room went quiet. After a long moment, he said carefully, if I put your name on everything, if I include you in every detail, are you staying? My heart cracked at that. He wasn't asking because he valued me. He was bargaining to keep the life he liked. I'm not negotiating my worth, I said. If I stay, it's because you see me, not because you need me. His expression twisted. So you are thinking of leaving? I'm thinking about whether there's anything left to stay for. Daniel gripped the edge of the counter as if the truth destabilized him. You're my wife. I'm a person, I corrected. A person with choices. He stared at me, hurt, angry, disoriented, and maybe for the first time he realized I wasn't bluffing. What happens now? He asked quietly. I took a long breath and said the words that had been forming since the moment I overheard him with Lorenzo. I need space, I told him. Emotionally, mentally. I'm not making a decision about our marriage today, but I'm not moving into a home that's not legally mine. And I won't continue a marriage where my voice doesn't exist. Daniel swallowed hard. So what do we do? You call Lorenzo, I said. You tell him the deal is paused, not canceled, paused. And then you and I talk honestly, really talk. For the first time in decades, he looked at me as if I'd asked for a miracle. But then, slowly, painfully, he nodded. I'll call him. I know, I said, because this time, Daniel, I'm not backing down. He hesitated. And after that, I said, standing, I'm meeting with a lawyer. His head snapped up. A lawyer? For information, I clarified. To understand my options. I'm not filing anything today, but I want clarity. Daniel sagged, deflating like a balloon losing air. So this is really happening? Yes, I whispered, it is. He looked at me with something like fear. Maybe he finally realized the marriage didn't end in a shout. Sometimes it ends in a soft sentence, spoken by a woman who finally knows her own worth. I left him in the kitchen, numb and hollow, not victorious, just honest. And as I closed the bedroom door behind me, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Mrs. Hart, this is Lorenzo. I believe we should speak privately. My breath caught. Privately? What could he possibly have to say now? Little did I know. He was about to tell me something that would change everything I thought I knew about the deal and about Daniel. I stared at the message for a full 30 seconds before my mind caught up with my eyes. Mrs. Hart, this is Lorenzo. I believe we should speak privately. Privately. That one word sat heavy on my tongue. Daniel was still in the kitchen, leaning over the counter with the posture of a man who'd been hollowed out overnight. He hadn't noticed my phone buzz. He was too deep in whatever thoughts he'd been drowning in. I stepped quietly into the hallway and typed back, yes. When? The reply came instantly. Now, if possible. I'm outside. Outside. I crossed the living room and parted the curtains just a sliver. There he was, leaning against his dark sedan at the curb, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. What on earth was he doing here? I slipped on my shoes, grabbed a light sweater, and stepped outside before Daniel could ask questions. Lorenzo straightened as I approached. Mrs. Hart, he greeted softly. Nora, I corrected. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Is everything all right? He gave a small, troubled sigh. That depends. I didn't want to text details. It felt improper. I folded my arms. Then please, tell me what this is about. He paused as if gathering the right words. I've met many couples when selling property, he began. Some harmonious, some tense, some barely speaking. But rarely do I encounter a situation that unsettled me after they left. I blinked, unsure where this was going. He continued. I couldn't stop thinking about what your husband said, and your face while he said it. My stomach tightened. You suspected I understood, I said. Yes, he admitted. You hit it well, but your eyes reacted. And afterward, I felt deeply uncomfortable continuing the transaction without ensuring you had agency. Agency, a word I'd never had the courage to claim. I appreciate that, I whispered. But Daniel has already agreed to pause the deal. Lorenzo nodded. That's why I'm here, because there's something you need to know, something your husband tried to conceal before you even stepped inside the townhouse. My pulse quickened. Conceal what? Lorenzo opened his car door, retrieved a thin folder, and held it out to me. Preliminary financial disclosures, he said. I emailed these to Daniel last week, standard procedure, but he replied with a request that struck me as unusual. I took the folder. What request? He met my eyes steadily. He asked me to remove you from the list of required signatures before ever showing you the property. My breath left my body in one violent exhale. He what? It's not standard practice, Lorenzo explained gently. When a couple is legally married, both names typically appear unless otherwise agreed. He insisted you were uninvolved and uninterested. He said you preferred not to deal with paperwork at your age. My age. My age. The world seemed to tilt, and I gripped the folder tighter. He told me, Lorenzo added quietly, that involving you would slow things down. A laugh broke out of me, sharp and humorless. Slow things down by having a legal right to my own home. I shook my head, feeling heat rise behind my eyes. But that's not all, Lorenzo said, lowering his voice. This morning, he emailed again. Oh, God. What did he say? He asked if I could prepare a version of the contract that listed him as the sole buyer and classified you as a non-participating spouse. The words punched straight through me. Non-participating spouse. Like an elderly relative who sits quietly in the corner while real adults handle business. My throat burned. Lorenzo continued. I told him I couldn't ethically do that without your explicit consent. He ignored the concern. That's when I decided I needed to speak with you directly. I closed the folder, holding it against my chest like a shield. Why tell me? I whispered. You don't even know me. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. My mother was treated similarly by my father. Silenced, excluded, condescended to. It took her years to reclaim her voice. And when I saw your expression in that kitchen, it was the same expression she wore before she left him. He paused. I promised myself that if I ever recognized that look in another woman, I wouldn't stay silent. The kindness almost undid me. I took a trembling breath. Thank you. You don't owe me anything, he said gently. But you deserve fairness and representation and choice. I nodded, blinking back tears. Then he added, if you ever decide to proceed alone or need advice navigating the process, I am here. Something inside me cracked open. Lorenzo? I asked softly. Yes? What do you think I should do? He looked toward my house, toward the kitchen where Daniel was undoubtedly pacing or pretending not to. I think, he said carefully, you already know. You just needed proof. He handed me his card. Call me if you need anything at all. And then he left, silently, respectfully, driving away down our quiet street as if he delivered a truth too heavy to stay near. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the folder warm from my hands. When I finally re-entered the house, Daniel turned from the sink, startled. Nora, who was that? I held the folder against my chest and met his eyes with a steadiness I didn't recognize in myself. Daniel, I said quietly, we need to talk. And for the first time in our entire marriage, he looked afraid. We sat at the dining table, the one we'd eaten thousands of dinners at, argued at, celebrated holidays at. But suddenly it felt like neutral territory in a conflict no one had prepared for. Daniel stared at the folder in my hands. "What is that?" he asked. "You know what it is," I said, placing it gently on the table. He swallowed. Esther said, "Nora, please, can we ease into this?" "No," I replied plainly. "We're past easing." He closed his eyes briefly, like bracing for impact. "What did he say to you?" I opened the folder, sliding out the printouts. "He told me you contacted him before we ever viewed the townhouse, that you asked to have my name removed from the required signatures." Daniel froze completely. "And," I continued, "he showed me your email from this morning, requesting a contract listing you as the sole buyer and referring to me as a non-participating spouse." Daniel's face drained of the color. "I can explain," he whispered. "Good," I said. "I'd love to hear something, anything that makes this less insulting." He rubbed his temples. "Nora, listen. I didn't think you'd care about details. I thought it would overwhelm you. I thought you'd prefer simplicity." "You thought I'd prefer not to exist," I corrected. He flinched. I leaned forward, voice softer but stronger. "Say it plainly, Daniel. You didn't want me involved." "I wanted control," he blurted out, then immediately regretted the honesty. "I mean, no, I wanted things to go smoothly. I didn't want—" I raised a hand. "Stop." He stopped. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I asked. "Not the paperwork, not the house, not even the lying." He swallowed. "Then what?" "You made decisions based on a version of me that hasn't existed in years. You saw me as small, and then you shrank me further to fit your comfort." He sat back, stunned. I continued. "I've never stopped wanting to grow, to learn, to contribute. You just stopped seeing me." He looked down at his hands, aging hands, hands I had held through so much life. "I didn't realize," he whispered. "You didn't want to realize," I said. "It was easier not to." He looked up, eyes glassy. "Are you leaving me?" I inhaled slowly, choosing each word with care. "I'm leaving the version of us that hurt me." He blinked rapidly. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said gently, "I'm filing for divorce." His breath caught. "Nora, I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm freeing myself." He shook his head wildly. "We can fix this." "No," I said. "We can't fix what you refuse to understand. And the moment you wrote non-participating spouse, you told the truth of how you see me." He covered his face, shoulders shaking. I sat still, watching him break open in a way I never wanted, but always feared. After a long while, he whispered, "I didn't think you'd ever leave." And that was the saddest truth of all. "I know," I said. "You counted on it." He lowered his hands, eyes wet. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said softly, "but I'm done losing myself inside you." He nodded slowly, defeated. "What happens now?" "I'm moving forward," I said. "You'll get your appraisal. We'll divide the assets. We'll do it respectfully, but I'm building a life I belong in." He looked at me like a man watching a door close in slow motion. "Is there someone else?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "No." "But there will be," he murmured. "Maybe," I answered honestly, "but that's not why I'm leaving." He studied me a long moment, then he nodded, not in agreement, but in surrender. "I'll cooperate," he said, "with everything. You have my word." I believed him, not because he suddenly transformed into a better man, but because he finally realized I wasn't bluffing. I stood, gathering the folder. "Thank you." He didn't answer. As I walked down the hallway, I heard him whisper to the empty room, "I didn't know you were this strong." I paused, hand on the wall. "I didn't either," I whispered back, too softly for him to hear. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, signatures, and the quiet, exhausting grief of untangling a 40-year marriage. Daniel didn't interfere, didn't bargain, didn't stall. He simply complied. On the day the divorce became official, he stopped by to hand me one last document. His eyes were tired but kind. Kind in a way they hadn't been for decades. "You deserve better than the man I became," he said simply. I nodded. and you deserve someone who doesn't have to shrink to survive. We parted without anger, just two people who'd grown beyond each other. 3 months later, with the settlement finalized and my portion of the assets in my account, I called the number on Lorenzo's card. "Is the townhouse still available?" I asked, a stunned pause, then a warm smile in his voice. "For you, yes." And that moment right there felt like the turning of a key inside a locked room. The day I signed the deed, my hand shook only once. When I wrote my name, not his, not ours, mine. As I walked through the townhouse, my townhouse, I felt the sunlight on my face the same way I had months earlier. But everything was different. Everything was mine. And when I stepped onto the balcony, my phone buzzed. A message from Julian. "I'm heading your way. Want me to bring coffee?" I smiled, an honest, hopeful smile. "Yes," I typed. "When you come see my new place." I set my phone down and looked out at the river, the world wide open before me. After 60 years, I had learned a new language, not Italian, a language called self-worth, and I was finally fluent. The first morning I woke up in my new townhouse, the light looked different. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe daylight is daylight everywhere. But as it slipped across my floors, it felt like something had shifted, like I was standing inside a life that finally fit the shape of me. I made coffee slowly, deliberately. No rush, no one waiting for their mug filled first. No footsteps stomping down the hall to remind me to be quick, Nora, I'm running late. Just silence, a peaceful, open silence that didn't demand anything from me. I sat at the little dining table I'd picked out myself. The chair cushions were the exact shade of blue Daniel always said was too bright. Funny how liberating it felt to sit on something he never would have approved. I opened my notebook, the one that used to hide under blankets and sweaters, and turned to a clean page. Not for vocabulary this time, for something else. Something I hadn't felt brave enough to put into words until now. At the top, I wrote what my new life will hold, and then slowly, peace that doesn't depend on someone else's mood, decisions that belong to me. A home where my voice doesn't vanish. Friends who see me. Love, if it comes, that grows instead of shrinks me. Work that respects me. The courage to keep choosing myself, I put down my pen and breathed. For the first time in decades, the future didn't scare me. It felt like a room full of open windows. Around 10, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was even before I opened the door. Julian stood there holding 2 coffees, the strong dark blend he knew I liked. He still wore that soft smile, the one that didn't push or presume anything. "I figured your first morning here deserved good coffee," he said. "It does," I answered, stepping aside to let him in. "Thank you." He looked around, taking in the space slowly, respectfully, not like a man assessing property, but like someone witnessing a woman settling into her freedom. "It suits you," he said. "Does it?" I asked. "Completely." We walked through the rooms together. Unlike Daniel, he didn't comment on the price, the resale value, or what walls I should knock down. He just admired what I loved. "This balcony," he murmured. "It feels peaceful." That's what I wanted. You created exactly that. The simplicity of his words softened something inside me. We sat outside, coffees warming our hands. The river glimmered in the distance. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to remind me beauty doesn't have to shout to be real. Julian took a deep breath. "Nora, may I say something without overstepping?" I nodded. "You didn't just survive what happened," he said gently. "You transformed from someone who whispered to someone who finally knows how to speak." I laughed softly. It didn't feel like transformation. It felt like heartbreak and paperwork. "But now look," he said, gesturing to the sunlight, the view, the table between us. "Look what grew out of all that." I looked, really looked. He was right. The woman I had been, the one who waited quietly, who smiled politely, who shrank to keep a man comfortable, that woman had dissolved somewhere between an Italian phrase and a broken marriage. In her place stood someone I almost didn't recognize, someone stronger, clearer, braver. "Julian," I said quietly. Can I tell you something? Of course. I turned my coffee cup slowly. For years, silence was my shield. I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd stay safe. He nodded. But silence can become a prison. I met his eyes. Silence doesn't mean ignorance. Sometimes it means I'm collecting evidence. His eyebrows lifted, surprised, impressed. That's wise. It's true, I said. I stayed quiet long enough to see who Daniel really was. And now, and now, I whispered, the day I stopped being useful to him, I finally became myself. Emotion flickered across his face, the kind that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with respect. Nora, he said softly, you deserve every inch of this new life. I exhaled, letting those words sink into the places still sore from all the years I doubted them. We spent an hour talking about everything and nothing, upcoming work projects, travel dreams, the best place to get pastries nearby. When he finally stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. If you ever want company, he said gently, a conversation, or even just someone to sit quietly with, like I'm here. The old version of me would have said something apologetic, grateful, but distant, careful not to inconvenience anyone. The new me just smiled and said, I know. And I did. That afternoon, after he left, I allowed myself a moment to revisit the life I'd walked away from. Daniel and I had exchanged a few civil emails about the last pieces of documentation. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't vindictive. In some ways, that made it harder, not easier. People expect leaving to feel like ripping off a bandage. But after 40 years, leaving feels like closing a book you once memorized, then realizing the story no longer belongs to you. I wished him well, truly. But I didn't wish to go back. Near sunset, I stepped onto the balcony again. The city hummed softly below. A couple walked a dog along the river path. Somewhere, a musician practiced a violin piece that drifted faintly through the air. The world felt tender, possible. I wrapped my arms loosely around myself, not in fear, but in gratitude. Everything that had tried to bury me had become soil for something new. I whispered into the warm air, I made it. And I had. Not because I was fearless, but because I finally chose myself over the comfort of someone else's certainty. My phone buzzed, messages from my daughter, from a coworker, from Julian, life pulling me forward. I turned back inside, closing the balcony door gently. Tomorrow, I'd start unpacking everything I'd held inside for years, not just boxes of dishes and books, but the pieces of myself I'd long neglected. And I'd build something with them, something beautiful, something mine. So that's my story. If it reached you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or the courage waiting quietly inside you, then I'm grateful we found each other here. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Echo Lens Stories and tell me where you're listening from, because maybe your story is next, and maybe your new life is already waiting for you.